Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're, of course, going to have another incredible episode, just like always. So hopefully you guys enjoy this episode we're going to have today. And the first topic we're going to discuss is magic legal theory, or magic justice, that we're now seeing more and more in this country. And I bring this up because last week we saw a lot of curious cases of magic justice going on. And if you guys have been following along with the Darrell Brooks trial, you've been seeing magic justice in action. And with the Darrell Brooks, if you guys don't remember, he is the Waukesha, I guess killer you would say, or the driver who, alleged driver, we have to say alleged driver, of course, alleged driver who allegedly plowed over six people, killed 6 people, and injured like 60 other people in the Waukesha Christmas parade last year. And he was driven by anti-white animus. He had made numerous anti-white comments on social media and private, and all of his victims were white, and he is a black man. Now, in the court case that has been going on, he is representing himself. And throughout the time, he has turned this into a circus. He keeps insisting that he is not Darrell Brooks. He does not know who Darrell Brooks is. He harasses and mocks a lot of the witnesses who are his victims, by the way. These are people who witnessed him run over their loved ones or ran over him, or they were run over by him themselves, allegedly, of course. And he is just making a mockery of justice in the trial. And he keeps getting removed because he disrupts. He throws fits anytime he introduces evidence he's not allowed to introduce, or he does things that he's just not allowed to do. Last Friday, there will probably be new outbursts today that we may, by the time I'm recording, that I have not seen yet. But he, on Friday, when he was there, he got removed from court 3 times, 3 or 4 times. It's unclear whether it's 3 or 4 because there was a final removal that he did when he slammed his fist down on the table and began glaring at the judge like he was about to murder her. And the judge was so terrified of it that she had to call recess. So due to his actions, they keep having to, recess the court or have him removed from court. And then they basically put him in timeout. It's like a really poorly behaved toddler who will not sit down, will not be quiet, will just keep acting up and causing disturbance. And they're like, okay, you're sitting timeout. And then 10 minutes later, they come back from timeout and they keep causing disturbance and keep acting up. One time he took off his shirt and began violently threatening people in the court. And so it's just a total mockery of justice. And you have to remember is that most of the people in the court are victims of Darrell Brooks, are the people who are still, traumatized by that event of, an FCV slamming into a Christmas parade. And in his victims, by the way, 4 of them were grandmas who were part of this group, like a granny group, marching in this parade. 1 was a child, I believe, 8 years old. So 5 of his 6 victims were either elderly or children. And, over 60 people were injured. Several of them were children. And this is not a good person at all. And what they're doing here is allowing him to just re-victimize his victims, to re-traumatize them, and to mock them, and to dominate them in a way that he is you're not going to make me seem the guilty party. I'm going to make this a clown show, and I'm going to make a mockery of justice here. And you're going to have to sit through it, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, there are ways the judge could have not allowed this. I mean, there are plenty of ways that this is not going to make a mockery of court. Just imagine if the Buffalo mass shooter decided to represent himself, and the victims, the non-white victims, and the family came in to testify against him. And he spent the whole time that's not me. And then he kept mocking their experience, saying you didn't see that. And that would have been an outrage. The judge would never allow that. Or just imagine with Dylan Roof with the Charleston mass shooting. Imagine if he had done that. They would have never allowed that. This is just such an outrage that they are allowing this guy who clearly did this crime, who is clearly guilty, and he is just the whole point of the trial is to show that we went and got justice in a fair manner where we heard all the evidence, we allowed him to defend himself, or to have representation to defend himself, but it was an orderly fashion where we're not trying to re-traumatize the victims or re-attack them or to these people suffered through a lot. A lot of them, there's serious damages from those days that still lingers on for those people. And here they are wanting their time for justice, and they have Daryl Brooks proposing magic legal theory where he's like, I'm not that person, I'm not that, and he's acting like a petulant toddler, and all they can do is keep putting the petulant toddler in timeout, and as he comes back and he keeps misbehaving. And so just imagine what it's doing for the victims. And it's just making that this case is not a serious case. They would never allow this in any type of other case. Just like I did the mass shootings, but imagine if terrorists were allowed to do this stuff. Imagine if anyone was allowed to do this type of behavior. The only type of example I can think of is when Ted Bundy defended himself during one of his trials. That was, and people, that was outrageous at that time. Now, I would say Ted Bundy was at least using like arguments and stuff, like actual legal arguments. The judge actually thought that he's like, Wilson, you could have made a good lawyer at the end of the video, but Daryl Brooks is not even making legal arguments. She's just claiming I'm not Daryl Brooks and like throwing a fit and like turning the courtroom into his own little playpen. And it's essentially saying that like we can't do anything about this person. Sorry, victims, it's what it is. And I think even though Ted Bundy was white, I think if they're, Daryl Brooks, let's say James Fields had tried to do this or somebody of that sort had tried to do this, they would have never allowed that type of behavior to go allowed. And it's just, this guy was also they were questioning whether he was competent to stand trial, much less competent to provide his own representation. So, I mean, it is. And so when people think about this as a serious case, they're instead thinking it as like a joke case when this guy murdered 6 people out of anti-white hatred and he injured dozens of others. It's very troubling case to watch. I mean, some of it is like you do want to laugh at like this stuff, but you have to remember is that this guy is accused of very serious crimes, and he wants. I don't know if it's intention. I don't know what intention he has. I think it's just he's like, how dare they arrest me and say I did something wrong? Because for a lot of these Magic Americans, they feel no matter what they did, they are totally in the right. Even if they beat someone to near to death, it's like, well, that person shouldn't got in my way. I used this example recently where there was this horrible beating in a New York City subway where this Hispanic woman got beaten just brutally. Like this guy stomped on her and like did this just like terrible damage to this poor woman, and it was just because the woman ignored his catcalls. And they interviewed the guy, and the guy was saying that it's her fault and he has zero remorse for it, and and he wasn't trying to kill her. If he tried to kill her, he would have done worse damage. And it's the same with Daryl Brooks. Like Daryl Brooks doesn't think he did anything wrong. He thinks he's in the right, and it's a miscarriage of justice to allow him to be punished. One funny thing for the court that is actually outside of this is that they do interview a white guy who is practicing the Buffalo Wild Wings option. This guy, for some reason, allowed Daryl Brooks into his house and made him a sandwich. And he's like, oh, I wasn't paying attention to what was going on in the parade. I was watching football. I forget if this day happened on a Saturday or Sunday, but it was around Thanksgiving time. It was like, I think it was the weekend after Thanksgiving. So it could have been either NFL or college football he would have been watching. I think because people are going to mock me for whatever. But anyway, he was watching football. Guy came over, made him a sandwich. I imagine just like how trusting and altruistic white people are. It's like, this is how like people always like talk about how like evil and racist we are. And just like imagine like a guy, like you see some crazed maniac come into your house and you're just like, he looks all right to me, and you make him a sandwich. I would have never. Whites need to not let strangers into their home. It's like very fortunate this guy didn't get killed. This guy was like, oh, he seemed all right to me. It's like, come on, man, what are you doing? It's just, but it's unfortunately it's a part of larger problems that we're seeing, and there's even worse cases. I think the one or plus side. I mean, the two things to consider is that in order to have the legal justice system we have, and even despite all the legal justice problems we have, is like we do insist on fairness. We do insist on proving beyond a reasonable doubt that these people are guilty, and this is why we have the trials that we do. And our system, for most of its history, has worked much better than other alternatives. I think if our legal system, historically speaking, it's and you're judged by your peers, not judged by just a judge, or you have to have habeas corpus. They have to have a reason for imprisoning you. There are such strong mechanisms for protecting the individual under our legal system, and you're equal before law. And some of these things that we may not like, we still have to see is like, well, what's the alternative? And if we had some alternatives, they'd be throwing people like Kyle Rittenhouse into jail just for upsetting, because the prosecutor would be weighted towards the prosecutor. So sometimes it can benefit us. And I think with Darrell Brooks, he is absolutely can be found guilty. He's going to get a long sentence. He's going to be probably in life in jail. I don't know if Wisconsin has the death penalty. I don't know if Wisconsin allows the death penalty. I mean, they should pursue the death penalty for here. This is definitely a case that should have the death penalty, but I think he's going to be found guilty. He is not going to be found not guilty. I'm sure the jury views him with disgust and is not being convinced by his antics. So that's the one good thing. The problem is that for other cases, it's particularly involving black criminals, the victims aren't so lucky. We have an example of this, and this is actually very infuriating, from the Ethan Liming case. If you guys remember, Ethan Liming was a young white man, star athlete, star baseball player at his high school, who got beaten to death by 3 black kids after they played a prank on them with water guns. With this, and so like I think even the 2 guys with Liming were black, but they were not killed in the beating. And this case was initially, they charged these guys with murder, but then they brought them down to assault charges, and saying that, and now they're trying to make cases that, well, they actually defended themselves against water guns. And so the prosecution is going with light charges, and one guy who was not charged with the beating death of Liming got to plead down to a misdemeanor assault, and it was the assault on Liming's 2 friends that he was with. And he got a suspended 180-day sentence. He has served at least like half of it, maybe not half, but a significant amount of it. And so he's not going to serve many days in jail. I think under 100 days in jail, that more than he's already served. And that's it. That's all he gets for the beating death of a white kid. And I'm mistaken, he will still have to serve at least 100 days in jail. He's only served 56 days in jail, so he has to serve out for 124 days. So, or however many more days he has. And that's justice. So you can literally help beat to death some white kid over a prank, and you get 100 days in jail. And then the media treats you as self-defense. It's like all the news reports. There was a news report from the local paper, and this is in Ohio, so it's Akron, and they essentially defended it as like the kid died of an accident. It's like, oh, well, they got into a fight and he fell down and he hit his head, and so it was like an accident that he died. It's like, no, these guys beat him to death. They beat him to death. That's what they did. And they're getting light sentences, and they're getting joke charges. And so it's like, this guy wasn't even charged for the assault on Liming. He was excluded from those charges. The other 2 guys are what charged in it, and they're all saying that they were doing stand your ground. This was an example of stand your ground because Ethan Liming had assaulted them with a water gun as a prank, as a high school prank, and this gave them justification to murder him. Now, imagine this. Imagine if it was a black kid. Now, I think it is like, once again, we do say, imagine if the races were reversed. A lot of people like to say that, but here in this case, we can do this because there have been several cases of this where kids, like black kids, have pointed guns that have turned out to be pellet guns or what have you at officers, and they've been shot, and then they turned these kids into martyrs when they pointed what appeared to be a firearm at a police officer, and then they're like, how dare the police officer shoot that kid? I think it was Tamir Rice, who was like a 12 or 13-year-old, pointed at what appeared to be a gun at a police officer. The police officer shot him, killed him, and then he was turned into a martyr. So just imagine the story if a black kid went up to a water gun and used it against 3 white kids, and the 3 white kids beat him to death. Do you think that those guys would be able to plead down to misdemeanor assault charges? Do you think the mainstream media would say that they acted in self-defense? Do you think that their lawyers would be able to have their careers and not be harassed if they're saying that these kids should have never been charged, which is what the defense attorneys are saying, that they're saying that, like, well, we see this charge, but this guy shouldn't be, none of them should be charged at all. They were acting in self-defense. This is all Ethan Liming's fault. It's like saying that, I think he's like 17 years old. It's like 17-year-olds have never played pranks on each other before. They've never done that type of stuff. And this is clearly with water gun. Even though they first ran away and they have been squirted or whatever with water, I think it was like a water pellets or whatever, they would clearly realize that it's not a real firearm. And the retaliation into beating him to death was so out of the realm of what was likely. And just even look at this, comparing this case to Ahmaud Arbery, who Ahmaud Arbery was likely in pursuing a crime. He attacked the McMichaels who had guns on them, and they shot him. And all those guys have faced the most serious penalties imaginable in our court system. Now, they not only got murder charges, they got federal hate crime charges put on them. And they're going to be sent to the toughest jails in Georgia just to please the family members, the Arbery family members. And the Liming family is like outraged by this. I would actually say this is a difference. I highlighted the case of Elijah DeWitt, who was another, Chad white kid athlete who got murdered by blacks, but his families forgave the killers. The Liming family, I believe Liming's father is actually a pastor. Liming's father did not forgive the killers. Liming's father was like talking about how sad he is that they've taken something from me, and his family is fighting for justice for their, son who was brutally murdered for no reason at all. And that does show the comparison. Like this guy's not going on there and going on tirades on TV or stuff. He's just simply seeking justice and not giving forgiveness when none is asked, which is the big difference between him and the Elijah DeWitt case, where the killers and Elijah DeWitt may be unrepentant, said that the kid deserved it, but the family's already forgiven him. While here in Liming, these kids are acting like they did nothing wrong, and obviously the family, and the father's a pastor, isn't giving forgiveness because they're like, these kids aren't deserving forgiveness. We want justice then we can talk about forgiveness, which is the proper way to go. And so this is a case where the justice system, they initially got these kids for felony murder, but obviously the black powers that are in that city did not want these kids to face, they wanted to blame the white person for their own murder, say that it's their fault. They shouldn't have been, playing a prank on others. They shouldn't have been doing that. And it's the white kid's fault for getting his, beaten to death. And they're all wanting to say this. And if I remember correctly, I think one thing is that Liming may have actually tried to be the mediator, is that it was more his friends who were the one initiating the prank, and he tried to mediate, and he was the one who paid the consequences. But that's what gets you misdemeanor assault. I think he was the only white person involved, so no justice for him. And there's a couple of different cases where this, a case I always use is from South Carolina. It happened in 2017. There was a retired fire chief or volunteer fire chief who was just sitting in his car. He's like 77 years old. He was a deacon at his local Methodist church or local church. Star citizen. He was just sitting alone in his truck, and a black guy approached him. And the black guy apparently got startled by approaching this guy in his truck, and he then black guy shot him to death. And this happened in 2017 in Beaufort, South Carolina. It's sort of near Charleston area. And it's clearly murder. There's no evidence that the 77-year-old pointed a gun at this guy, and he's sitting alone in his truck on it was like a Monday morning. It was a morning time where you would have not, clear as day. But the black guy said he was startled by approaching this guy in his truck, shot him to death. And he was exonerated by a jury, which we can only assume that it was an all-black jury. And he was let off last year. So that's one case. There's a case from a home invasion that happened in Florida last year, a home invasion case, where there was this woman who was the forewoman on the jury. And actually, to go quick back, because I need to make sure that I'm saying this case correctly. This happened in Jasper County, South Carolina. The black killer was Devin Dunham, and the white victim was Ernest Stevens. So this is not just me making it up. And I'll have to say more about the Florida case too, which in this case, and this is in the murder trial of Deontay Rosilis. This happened last year. He was convicted of a really brutal home invasion robbery murder. And their case, they were trying to plead down his case to a manslaughter conviction because black jurors who were on the jury said they would never convict a young black man of murder. And the forewoman who was like a not white herself, she was like a mix of many different races, felt it was like so ridiculous. And she saw that the killer was celebrating the fact that he was likely to get a light charge, and she switched her verdict at the end. But she was blaming that the black jurors would not vote to convict a black man. And there's several cases. So sometimes when this justice is not carried out, it's due to jurors. And there's several cases of this. Like in Washington, D.C., a lot of the prosecutors are not bringing forth charges against these carjackers. Many of them, or pretty much all of them, are black teenagers who, because they say that a jury in D.C. will not vote to convict, which will be predominantly black. And they do not want to convict these guys of crime. They have already convinced themselves that to send them to jail is a worse offense than to punishing a crime or the crime itself. And they don't want to do that, and they view this as a racist system. The worst example is there's this black serial killer, Billy Kimmerer. I think that's how you pronounce it. He's an African immigrant. He killed dozens of elderly primarily white women, and stole their like jewels and all this stuff. And he was like a home healthcare worker. And he's got several. They're not sure how many he's got, but it's at least I think it's at least a dozen now. And he had a jury last year, and this is around the time of the Ahmaud Arbery, because I remember tweeting about this. And pretty much the whole jury was like, obviously this guy's guilty. He's guilty of sin. He's a horrible criminal. We're not going to do this. But there's one juror. They didn't name the race, but I think we can all assume what the race was. And this woman said, like, nope, I'm not voting. I'm voting not guilty. And they're like, do you need to see any more evidence? We have more evidence to show you. And she's like, no, I'm convinced he's not guilty. And they're like, so there's no way we can persuade you. And they're like, because they had a hung jury, and generally when you have a hung jury, they'll try to do things to, make sure that the jury comes to unanimous agreement. And she's like, no, I'm convinced. So likely this black juror saw that there's this black guy killing and robbing all these elderly white women. And she's like, I don't see anything wrong in this. I'm not going to vote to convict this guy. I'm not going to vote to send this guy to jail. And this guy's like a horrible serial killer. So there's that case. And so there's so many more cases. And this is just what we hear about in the news. You have to think about that district attorneys are giving blacks lenient sentencing because they know they can't take them to jury trial, because especially after the George Floyd revolution, is that blacks do not want to vote to convict to send these guys to jail. So they'll just find them on the most lenient charge, send them that. And also they're reducing their sentencing guidelines to get like them the least amount of time in jail as possible. And this is why we have such a messed up criminal system right now, because, a lot of Republicans are getting the fact that we're going light on criminals. But at the same time, we have this general pervasiveness in our culture that we're oppressing blacks, and our judicial system practices systemic racism towards blacks. Yet we do have a form of systemic racism now, and that is the lack of punishment towards blacks for no matter what they do. There's another case where this guy was a hardened criminal who got out, who tried to kill his girlfriend and their kid, and or is a pregnant girlfriend. Actually, this case is out in Texas. Having to refresh my memory on some of these cases. This guy, black guy, he beat his girlfriend. His girlfriend's name was LaShonda. I think we can assume that they're the same race. He beat her so bad, and she was like pregnant, that they killed the unborn child. And he got no jail time for this. No jail time at all. Just adjudicated sentence. No jail time. Just that, and that's against their own people too. And there's another case where a black guy in Philadelphia, Jameer Harris, he got convicted of murder in like 2012, but he was exonerated because they found there was prosecutorial misconduct. But that didn't mean that he was like innocent. They just there's something messed up with the prosecutor, and then he was allowed to free, and they didn't decide to retry the case. Well, obviously he was just arrested for another murder of some guy. And once again, these people he's preying on, I believe, are black themselves. It's not even white. But in that case, in some of these cases, it's just the jury, the justice system going easy on blacks, and it's just there is a type of systemic racism going on, but it's in favor of blacks rather than against their favor. It's certainly not disfavoring them. And then we've got worse cases when it comes to blacks as judges. There was a case last week that I want to bring up too, but there's a case all the way back from, this is like 2014, 2015, where a black judge in Kentucky, Olu Stevens, I guess that's how you pronounce it, admonished a white family for their daughter now having a fear of black men after they were victims of a home invasion by black men. And he said, that deeply offends me. That's racist. And then he sentenced one of the men to a light sentence after hearing the fact of the family's racism. And then in 2016, he had to go on a 90-day suspension for comments he made. He's not a very good judge. Unfortunately, he's still a judge at this point, despite his infractions of what he's done. And now there is a wild case that we just uncovered last week. Cleveland Municipal Court Judge, Pinky Carr, yeah, that's her name, Pinky Carr, was suspended indefinitely for her practices of retaliating against people in the court. She kept the court going even at the height of the COVID, and she was ordering people's arrest for not showing up, even though pretty much all courts throughout the country were on halt during the peak of the epidemic back in spring of 2020. She would show up to court in spandex and tank tops and totally unprofessional attire and try to turn like her court into a game show. Like, I'll read some of the things that she's accused of here. The judge also falsified court journal entries by claiming that the prosecutor amended charges or that she had held hearings to determine a defendant's ability to pay fines or court costs. She used warrants and incarceration to force the payment of fines and costs by tying the person's bond to the amount of the fines and costs, essentially creating a modern-day debtor's prison. And then she also joked about accepting kickbacks in lieu of fines and having defendants give her and court staff items such as food, beverages, carpeting, or storage space in exchange for lenient sentencing. So also imagine that she's doing this in tank tops and t-shirts and like spandex. And this is like the modern court system where judges are like, you can pay me, you can provide me some new carpet if you want a lenient sentence. And so you have to imagine that there's a lot more of this going on in our court system. So it's very much like a magic justice system where it makes a mockery of the seriousness of the American judicial system, this system that we spent hundreds of years perfecting, based on English common law, brought to us, that we perfected through the Constitution and having all these levers and measures to ensure that we have a fair judicial system. It's being completely thrown out after the George Floyd Revolution to appease magic Americans and to, elevate them and to that they come to the example of where it's either like Pinky Carr or Darrell Brooks, and they make a total mockery of our system. Now, the good news is that both Pinky Carr and Darrell Brooks were punished. Or in the case of Darrell Brooks, he is going to be punished. But think about all the other people who are in similar cases, as I've outlined. These judges and many corrupt judges that are around who just keep their power and control and do similar things that Pinky Carr does. Or defendants who get light sentences, even though they're committed vicious crimes, like Darrell Brooks, and they're able to get away with this due to their race, due to the color of their skin. And this is how our judicial system works now. And it's a disturbing thought, and it's something that it's why we have to really push back on that cultural revolution that was inaugurated by George Floyd's death. And we cannot tolerate any type of support for Black Lives Matter or any of this type of bullshit that we have a systemic racist judicial system. That's bullshit. We don't. If anything, it favors blacks, not disfavors them. And you cannot give them any leeway in their arguments saying they're like, oh, it's just so terrible. And, oh, mass incarceration is so bad, blah, blah, blah. No, all that stuff is bullshit. And it's designed to make you have these travesties to justice that we keep witnessing time and time again when it comes to black defendants getting off easily just due to the color of their skin. And we can't tolerate that if we want to have a serious legal system. And I'm going to move on to another subject that is also presenting another problem for a legal system, but it doesn't have much to do with race or Actually, yeah, it doesn't really have much to do with race, but it also shows another problem with our legal system. Now, this is the Alex Jones case, and I'm sure a lot of you are aware that Alex Jones was hit with a nearly $1 billion judgment against him for his defamation trial over the Sandy Hook with the Sandy Hook parents. Now, that nearly $1 billion is 965 million is for compensatory damages, but there's an additional punitive damages. And what are they seeking? They are seeking $2.75 trillion in punitive damages. And just looking at that demand has to just blow your mind. You cannot be any type of sensible person and view that as a realistic demand, as a demand that is based in any type of reality or has any type of merit to it. Now, you can argue that Alex Jones is guilty of some sort of defamation. That's another argument that is beyond. I think clearly Alex Jones is being targeted for political reasons. They wanted to shut him up because they view him as a threat to the system, and they're using the Sandy Hook parents to do this. But now when you do post information that turns out to be false by people and you publicize that in a large forum, that does make you subject to defamation or libel charges. Whether it's worth $1 billion or $2.75 trillion, that boggles the mind. I don't know what the legitimate price was. Like with Alex Jones, I mean, he did issue an apology. He did, delete the articles. He did say that. I mean, that's usually how a lot of these defamation trials would. I mean, when it happened with the Covington Catholic kid, when he sued some of these major papers, all he got was, at most maybe a six-figure settlement. It's unclear how much of a settlement he did. Well, these papers issued him apologies, and they made some type of settlement. Now with Alex Jones, it was nowhere in the realm of $1 billion. And the difference between the Covington Catholic kid is like, this was like mainstream media outlets that people like, that makes your reputation, that determines your reputation, that determines whether you can have a job and whether, and normal people are reading this. Not like criticizing that like normal people don't read Alex Jones, but it's not like people are going to go for a job interview and it's like, InfoWars is saying that you're a satanic pedophile. I guess we're just not going to hire you, George Soros or whoever they're going after with that. And even with the Sandy Hook thing, some of the parents did said that they were receiving harassment and things, but to find a financial cost to what happened with Alex Jones, it's hard to prove, because it's not like saying that these people were like, I lost my job because Alex Jones said that I was a false flag or that my child wasn't real or whatever he was claiming. I don't think that stands on much ground, because people don't take Alex Jones as, or at least the people who like matter and like the elites and authorities don't take Alex Jones as like the serious source of news. Maybe they should. This is not me trying to criticize Alex Jones. I'm just saying this from a perspective of what liberals think. So it matters far more if CNN or Washington Post posts something false about you versus InfoWars. Because even for InfoWars, whatever information posts about you on InfoWars, it's unlikely to get you fired. It's unlikely to incur any financial costs. The thing you would have to say is that it's some type of harassment that may occur. Okay, if even that occurred, is it worth $965 million? Because you have to think that this is like more than what most corporations pay out for like settlements of things that they did wrong that actually got people hurt or people killed. Severely damage people's like entire livelihoods. Which for here, this family just could say, this guy, attacked our child. He was loose with false information. We had harassment. Maybe there's that case, but it's like, is that amounts to $1 billion? No. Does it amount to $2.7 trillion? No, that's like more than most the GDPs of most countries. Like, it's just and people are going to support it too, because they're like, there is no defense for saying false things about these people. And it's like, people like mainstream media lies about people all the damn time. There's no Kyle Rittenhouse is accused of being a white supremacist murderer. I don't think anyone is going to pay him $1 million, much less $1 billion, or even like the type of payouts he might get. I know that he's trying to pursue legal action, but I guarantee you that it probably won't even be in 7 figures that he would be awarded. It probably won't even be in 7 figures. It certainly won't be $965 million. And that actually had, like, Kyle Rittenhouse, the way he was covered in the Kenosha shooting, actually impacted his ability to have a normal life. With the Sandy Hook people, like, due to the fact that it's just Alex Jones, like, the one attacking them, not the mainstream media, and the fact that if anyone has ever heard, most people have heard of Alex Jones, unless they're like a big Alex Jones fan, which is, there's a sizable amount of people, but it's not like the large percentage of the population. Most people would just like, well, you got attacked by crazies. And so there's one argument that you could say is that there's an inability for Alex Jones to defame you because he is considered so toxic and outside the mainstream that if he attacks you, it doesn't really have any bearing on your reputation and your livelihood. And he can't like his attacks from InfoWars can't cost you your job or force people to like shun you and stuff. It's, unless you're like all your friends are InfoWars readers, which I don't think that was the case with Sandy Hook people. But it is like that. I mean, it's you can't. It's like that's just not how it works. And so I think an important takeaway from this case, I mean, there's a couple. It's like, one, you've got to be careful with what information you put out there, because especially in this case, I mean, a lot of people love to run with these theories that, like, you've got to go with this theory, you got to go with this theory. But if you can't back it up in a legal court of case, which is not what Alex Jones did. I mean, some people still want to insist that it's like a false flag, but it's like, Alex Jones didn't go up there and be like, his legal fits was not based around saying it was a false flag. He said he was sorry. He posted this information. He moved on. Whether he was should have been found guilty of it, that's for the legal case to matter. I don't think he owes what the court offered in compensatory damages, and the punitive damages is just so outrageous. And these parents know what they're doing. That's that the goal of this is not to seek justice. It's not to seek sufficient compensation. It's about bringing down Alex Jones. It's about bringing down conservative media. It's about attacking people who question mainstream orthodoxy and question the establishment. And they're using these parents to go after Jones. If there's something else about a defamation case, whether he's guilty or not, or whether he owes something, that's an entirely different matter. But the amount that is there and the purpose for doing so, that's really what's important. The most important thing so one takeaway is you got to be careful with that information, is that all these people always want you to put out information all the time. And if you don't have supporting evidence for it, or it's like really bad supporting evidence for it, and you have to go before a court of law to like defend your case, and if your defense of your case is to apologize and say you were wrong, then maybe you should think twice about putting some of this information out there. Not saying, I think like Alex Jones paid way more of a price than he should have for that. I mean, it's outrageous what's happening to him. I'm not saying that he is entirely at fault, or he is to blame for his situation. I think it's more that this case is not built on what he said about Sandy Hook. It's based on what he did in 2016. It's about him becoming a bigger figure in conservative media, and it's about using something to bring him down. But the other important takeaway is that I see a lot of conservatives, especially in the wake of the Covington Catholic case and Kyle Rittenhouse and others, is that they want to eliminate the high standard for libel law that we have in America that was set by New York Times versus Sullivan, where the New York Times was sued by actually Alabama segregationists for publishing an ad they said was defamatory, was slanderous, and they probably libelous, because we use all three different terms, but it was libelous that they published this ad, and then they sued over it, and then the Supreme Court found that there was like a much higher standard for libel that they had. And all conservatives are like, we've got to get rid of this so we can sue the mainstream media for calling us racist or attacking us, and this is what we're going to do if we're going to go about this. And this is like, we need a lower standard so we can attack journalists. And I've said this before, but might be the dumbest conservative idea that this is. All conservatives like we gotta punish our enemies and reward our friends. This is literally punishing yourselves and rewarding your enemies, because the people who are going to most benefit from this are the left. If we had lower libel standards, the left would sue conservative media out of business. Out of business. Because just think about all the liberal judges you have. Think about just how this Alex Jones case has turned into a total circus. Or they found a place in New England where they would obviously have the strongest case against Alex Jones and find the jury pool that's all going to hate him. Think about that. Now think about the cases that they would love to bring in trial. And also think of the fact that they can now have government officials can now sue media outlets. It's generally a lot of times like political leaders and others, they're, public figures. And so that they generally don't go into lawsuits unless it's like completely like wrong information, like something like, you had an affair or something, and it was like clearly not an affair. Sometimes there's a few cases like that, but it's an extremely high standard. So now with the eliminating the Sullivan standard, we could have AOC suing anyone who says that she supports open borders, or that she's a socialist, or probably if she's a communist, that she would love to sue that. So AOC and all these liberals are able to accumulate so much money. Imagine, say, just some random liberal is like, Breitbart attacked me as an open borders advocate. I don't support such a thing. Help me crowdfund a legal case against them. They would get millions of dollars to get the top legal talent, and there's probably liberal lawyers who would do it pro bono just so they could sink Breitbart, or do it for a nominal amount just for the obvious idea that they could sink Breitbart. So they go and sue Breitbart over saying that this Democrat or liberal is an open borders advocate. And they get them before a sympathetic judge, a sympathetic liberal judge, a sympathetic jury, and they get some insane amount of money that they're like, let's say $200 million. And that's like, and they're like, these scurrilous lies are never going to be tolerated again. And so they have the money to raise, they have the power to, they have the lawyers to do these cases, and they have a judicial system, which not in all cases, there's a lot of conservative judges out there, but they would try to, set the scales entirely in their favor. Or just think about this. Maybe the George Soros decides to sue Tucker Carlson for saying he supports the Great Replacement Theory. Do you think that's crazy? Okay, well, he may do that. And George Soros has a lot of money, and he would love the idea of penalizing Tucker and getting Fox News canceled off the air. And he could just do this. And so if you lower the libel standard, Fox News would go, and people are like, that's base, but nothing's going to replace it. Or pretty much all conservative media is going to go. Republican lawmakers would be sued just for saying that someone supports open borders, or just general attacks on Democrats, and they're saying that's wrong, and they'll be very autistic and spurg out about this and say that's like, I don't support open borders at all, or like they say I favor criminals. That's libel. I'm suing you. And so any of these type of things that they could sue, or just think about this case going on with George Floyd's family. Is that one of his baby mamas is suing Kanye West for $250 million for simply not believing the story around George Floyd. I don't know how strong of a case that is. I don't think it's that strong of a case, because it's not one of the major civil rights attorneys like Benjamin Crump who's like filing it. And Crump knows not to like file like frivolous shit that's going to get thrown out of court, because that's going to make him look like an idiot. It's not one of those people, so it might not stand up in court, but they're thinking about suing him. Now, if we reduce libel law, if we made a lower standard, Kanye West could get sued just for saying that George Floyd died of fentanyl overdose rather than, Derek Chauvin's knee. So just simply stating your opinion in a public forum, maybe you could even just be a random Twitter account that goes viral. You could be sued over your opinion without Sullivan, the high standard of libel law in place. Now, what would conservatives gain by this? I don't know. What would they gain? Because they don't have the resources to to engage in this type of this lawfare that conservatives do, and they're not going to get like the New York Times like canceled just for someone like I don't know even what example that would be that they would try to use to say this. Like maybe it's like they said Heavy D, Ron DeSantis is not an effective leader. We're suing over that, or this other things. And generally, liberals do write their articles to closer to inspection to ensure they're not going to get sued over these matters, compared to conservative media, are considered just like the people they would want to sue under conservative standards. And conservatives are just not going to raise the type of money to do this, and liberals would exploit it to the full extent to where all the people who would try to wage lawfare against the left over a lower standard of libel would already be bankrupt and ruined by the left's left's lawsuits, that they would not be able to maintain a defense against it. So all that standard would be is that New York Times could continue to publish lies about us, and same with the CNN and MSNBC. Meanwhile, Tucker Carlson is taken off the air and owes millions of dollars in damages for talking about the Great Replacement Theory. Or, Breitbart taken off, like Fox News is probably even taken off the air, like all these things. And you may criticize Fox News for being cringe, but imagine America without Fox News, or imagine America without talk radio. Imagine just all these people gone. And it's not like you're going to get replaced by the epic based, right-wing Twitter people or whoever you imagine is going to replace them. No, it's just there's not going to be an alternative out there. It's going to be harder to find that alternative. And even those people who people would want to think as replacing them, they're going to get sued for viral tweets. So the left would use it to the full extent. Just imagine how much money they spent to sue the people involved in Charlottesville. Just imagine the amount of money that they try to sue over police departments and all these other matters. They have those lawyers ready to go and ready to do their bidding. And they could probably find judges to sympathize with them. And so it would just abolish right-wing media entirely. Not just the mainstream conservatives, but it would also impact the people on the more dissident side, like American Renaissance, VDARE, what have you. Highly respected. Maybe I might get sued by NFL fans. I might get sued by NFL fans for libeling their fantasy football, for defaming fantasy football fans. And you laugh about that, but they could do that under the standard. And even if they lose, in those cases, you've spent a large amount of money. You're going to have to spend at least six figures to do any of these cases, unless it's incredibly spurious and a judge throws it out immediately. But you'd still spend a lot of money. You'd probably spend at least wages, even if a 5-figure that you spent on it. You'd still spend a lot of money. That's a hassle that impacts your life. And most conservatives don't have the resources to defend themselves in these cases. So whenever conservatives are talking about lowering the libel standard, people need to think back and say, who would actually use this? And it wouldn't be us. I mean, we would try to use it, but we wouldn't be the most affected by it or the most efficient in using it. It'd be the left, and the left would use it to bankrupt us and to kick us out of the public sphere and ruin us. And that's what would happen. That would be the end result. And it would be total liberal dominance of the public discourse. And that's what we don't want. And so if you're seeing this, if you're looking at the Alex Jones case and you're seeing what's happening to him, and if you're seeing the insane demands that they're wanting and the insane damages they want, and how ridiculous of a case it was, barring whether he defamed them or not, just how the court case was handled and operated by those TV cameras. I mean, it was just such a farce. Now, if you're seeing all that and you're thinking, we need to make it easier to sue people like Alex Jones, you are not helping our cause. You're aiding the enemy to hurt us and to weaken our side. And so that's the main takeaway I want to have is the high standard for libel laws. Yes. I mean, it would be great if we could sue Washington Post or these mainstream media outlets for defaming us and hurting our reputation. But think about as the alternative, when we lower those standards and thinking about all the power and resources the left has and the eagerness to use those resources and power against us, and specifically these type of cases, then you think, well, the alternative would be much worse. At least we're still able to operate in public discourse, and still there's people out there like Tucker who are able to speak the truth without having to worry about facing these spurious lawsuits over, defamation for speaking his mind and speaking the truth and speaking his political opinions. So that's my opinion on that. And now on to doing an update on the midterms. I think it's now clear Republicans are going to win big on the midterms. There may be people who may have doubted my belief that the Republicans were going to do well in the midterms. Sometimes it did not look as well. I think in August, whereas August or early September, there was these special elections, and it was showing that Democrats were outperforming in turnout compared to Republicans, and that was a major worry. I think at that time, I still predicted the Republicans would eke out a victory, but now it's pretty clear that Republicans are going to I've always said that they're going to take back the House. Even though I said if they did not take back the House, there were some big problems. But I was optimistic about that. Senate, I was, divided at times, especially with the ups and downs that are going on with some of these individual Senate races. But at this time, I can confidently predict that they're going to win the Senate, they're going to win the House. It's going to be they're going to win a ton of governor seats, and it's not going to be quite as much of a blowout as you think, because in some races, you would think that they would win like 6 or 7 seats in the Senate. I think at most they're probably going to. I don't want to say at most because there may be some surprises in like Oregon or Colorado, which Colorado is now becoming an interesting race. But I think it's a safe bet is 3 seats. I think Real Clear Politics put out their average and they said that they would win 3 seats, and it's in Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia. Yeah, with Herschel Walker. I said that Herschel Walker was probably not going to win. I was actually wrong. It looks like he's still going to win. They don't care about the abortion, the paying for an abortion story. So as I said at that time, when I talked about it, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, is that if Herschel Walker wins, it just shows how like completely changed America is that like sex scandals and these types of things that would completely ruin a candidate just 10 years ago. I mean, think to bring up an example is that there was a governor of South Carolina, Mark Sanford, who later returned to Congress and was a fervent anti-Trump guy. He then tried to run for president in 2020 against Trump, and it got nowhere, and so people forgot about him. But Mark Sanford ran off with his mistress, I think, into Latin America. He claimed he was hiking the Appalachian Trail, and they're like, what? That doesn't make sense for a governor. And this is like in 2009 to 2010. And he went off with his mistress, and he had to resign over it. Now you would just not have to resign over it at all. Like, nor would you have to worry about losing a campaign. Like, having to pay for an abortion of a woman you're not married to would be a big deal, especially for Republicans in the South. But now they're just like, oh, well, he's probably going to win anyway. He did remarkably well in the debate, especially considering the expectations. They thought that Warnock would steamroll over him and it'd be a massive embarrassment. Instead, he got some like good jibes in against Warnock. So it looks like he's even going to win. And I think Masters is going to win, and Laxalt in Nevada is going to win. The Colorado is an interesting race because there's a moderate Republican who's a never-Trumper who Trump has disavowed as unendorsed and told people not to vote for, but Ron DeSantis is trying to endorse him, which Trump said was a big mistake, showing off that there's the growing split between Trump and DeSantis, which is fine. That guy still might win. O'Day, I think is his name. And there's Oregon. There's a competitive race going on there. Actually, I'm mistaken. It's an Oregon governor race and a Washington Senate race where it's competitive. So my mistake on that, I said Oregon. I meant Washington. Easy to mix them up. I had to double check. I always get the states mixed up. So it's those 2 states. The one thing that they may have to worry about is in Utah. And most of the states that they thought that they had the seats, they look like they're going to keep. Ron Johnson's pulling away in Wisconsin. Vance is going to win in Ohio. Ted Budd in North Carolina is pulling away. I don't think Marco Rubio has to worry about anything in Florida. Iowa, they don't have to worry about anything. It's really just Pennsylvania, but even there, it looks like Oz is finally pulling ahead of Fetterman, and it looks like Oz is actually going to pull out. That's like the one. The 2 races actually that you really I think are most at risk of losing. It's still Pennsylvania. That's still a close race. It's still possible Oz might lose, but I think he's going to win. The one thing is like really up in the air is surprisingly Utah. I think Republicans are still going to hold this, but Evan McMullen is running a very competitive campaign. All the Mormons and moderate Republicans out, I mean, it's a very Mormon state, but the Mormon Republicans out there are wanting to vote for McMullen for some reason. And it's a very competitive race for Mike Lee. And, that could be a surprise upset, but that's just based on like how Mormons are operating compared to the rest of the Republican Party. But I think he'll still win. I think Lee will still win against McMullen. So it's looking very good in the House races. I think they're even predicting that they're going to win by even larger margins than they thought. So it's looking very good for Republicans. And some people out there might be like, well, who cares? They're not going to pass anything. Well, I mean, that's probably true, but they'd have to have a Republican president to pass anything. And if they did pass anything, it would be bad. We want them to pass nothing, because anything that they would pass would be terrible. But what they can do is first off, most importantly, they can prevent terrible legislation from being passed. That's a win in of itself. People want to discount that, but that's huge. Imagine if Democrats had a large majority and they could pass amnesty, they could pass these idiotic, insane criminal justice reforms, or just a whole host of other terrible things. Now that's impossible to do, and they may even have trouble getting their appointments through, their judicial appointments and other cabinet appointments through, and they could get, that would be a huge hurdle for Democrats. That's very beneficial to us. And not only that, when they have the majority in the House and Senate, they can conduct hearings and investigate things, like investigate what Biden's been doing, investigating Black Lives Matter and Antifa. I mean, these are possibilities. I don't know how possible it is that they do the investigation at BLM and Antifa. They may do that as a way to counteract January 6th, but they'll end the January 6th commission. They'll end, or the January 6th committee. They'll also investigate like Biden. They'll also they'll also haul in the FBI to answer questions about why they're persecuting pro-life protesters and other, conservatives. So all this is very good that they have. So it's all beneficial to us that this happens. And so we'll keep an eye on that. I think that's just giving people a white pill. I would say that one thing is, like, anytime I follow up to the new thing up to minute and make decisions based on that, rather than looking at the large picture, I sometimes regret doing that, especially when it comes to campaigns, because long time, it's better to look at the big picture of things rather than to get caught up into seeing this is going to be a blowout. I remember in 2020 that when, it looked like Trump was down by 10 points in or near 10 points in the RCP average, I said, wait till October. It's gonna narrow, and it's certainly narrowed. And depending on certain interpretations, the victory was not the result as predicted by those polls. Was not what occurred. So it's a much, much closer race than the polls were expecting. With this election, it looked like gas prices were going to stabilize up until November. They have not. Obviously, they're starting to rise again. Also, inflation, and the inflation is out of control. The economy is in a recession, and it's becoming more apparent. And abortion is sliding out of the public consciousness. There's not as much attention to it. There's still a lot of, when they do polling, every polling has shown that this is like a big issue for people, but economy, inflation, gas prices, other things cancel it out. Also the border crisis, in some polls it shows that the border is more important than abortion. Some it shows abortion's more important, but it effectively, in crime, those things kind of cancel out the abortion effect. And it may affect a few House races. There may be a few House races that could have, or maybe even one or two Senate races where it could have swung to Republicans, but abortion, that narrow push that it could have done made it. So I was more correct in, when I was talking about this initially when they struck down Roe v. Wade, that I don't think it would only have a narrow effect on it. It looked like it was going to have a major effect based on some of the special elections, but it doesn't appear so. Even the liberal mainstream media people at NBC News and CNN are predicting it looks good for Republicans. And it may be, some of these races may be closer than expected, because the abortion issue it's mainly helping Democrats with turnout, but it's only helping them among white college-educated whites, and probably Asians, but I don't know how much of that's not that big of a demographic, electorally speaking. But they're also having major problems with turning out black voters, and that's going to be a huge issue for statewide races, like in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, in Wisconsin, in a bunch of all these other places where they depend on the urban blacks to turn out, and they're just not turning, and they're worried that they're just not going to turn out. They may get college-educated whites to turn out, but that might be canceled out by rural whites and working-class whites turning out in large numbers for Republicans, especially over economy and those issues. So it's looking pretty good. But I think a lot of times I should just stick more to the big picture. I still was pretty optimistic that they would win. There may be commenters who may be like, oh, no, this. But I was still confident that they would win the House. I was a little more skeptical about the Senate, but I still predicted a narrow Senate win for Republicans, even at the doldrums of Republican polling back in like August. Now on to the Cognitive Elite questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Cognitive Elite option at Highly Respected Substack. And that's at highly-respected.substack.com. And so the first question we got today is from Johnny Chungus, who is a frequent Cognitive Elite guy. And as a reminder, you can ask as many questions as you want. It's just gotta, as long as we have enough time for it, we can get those in. And Johnny Chungus asks, is Gavin Newsom's latest request to debate DeSantis a sign he is going to primary Biden? And he goes on to say that he doesn't think that Newsom is as strong as a candidate as due to he's obsessed with DeSantis and Abbott, and he's trying to get the DOJ to arrest them. And it sounds like he's saying that DeSantis barely acknowledges his existence, blah, blah, and goes on and saying this stuff that he's a paper tiger. His latest request, it is trying to build him. I don't know if the paper tiger thing. Yeah, he may not be as cracked up to be in a general election. He may be a lot weaker than we think in a general election, but I think in a Democratic primary, he'd be a very strong candidate. Outside of a Democratic primary, I'm open to the idea he's a paper tiger. And I think especially depending on who he's going against. He does have a lot of charisma, but he doesn't have a lot of accomplishments from California, and he may have gone so far left wing in the primary or the general election and promising stuff as like reparations and other things. One thing I actually need to go on is building off the last topic. I'll go into this with Newsom wanting to challenge Biden, but actually something that I need to do. If black turnout is the reason why Democrats lose badly in the midterms, they are going to go full bore into promising reparations because they need something to get out the black vote. And what better way to get out the black vote than reparations? So you're going to see a lot more of these prominent Democrats, those who are waiting in the wings for Biden to not run for president in 2024, who are going to be promising reparations. Newsom is already a favor of reparations. He signed into law, a commission to study it, and he's all in favor of whatever that commission finds that they should be given for reparations. He's a supporter of reparations, so he's already got that box checked. Whether other candidates are going to do that, it remains to be seen. Now, it is part of him challenging DeSantis to a debate is about building his national reputation and getting his name in the news. And that is a sign that, yes, he wants to run for president, and he probably will run in 2024. What is going to happen? I think it's less interesting whether Newsom is going to run. It's more interesting is like what Biden wants to do. Biden wants to run again. Biden is committed to running again. Biden does not care about his senility or anything else. And there's been several presidents who were completely incapacitated, who should have not run, who ran for president. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was dying in 1944. He was literally dying. Like he had so many heart problems. He could barely, he had already been crippled, but he could even barely walk around. He couldn't give speeches for a long time. Like his fourth inaugural address was the shortest on record. I believe it was only 5 minutes long because he couldn't give a much longer of a speech. And people were like, who watched it were like, this is a dying man. Like this guy is on the point of death. It's like, everyone knew he was going to die too. And he still ran for president. He was able to do that in 1944. And he just went with it because he was so committed to power and he didn't feel there was a successor. I mean, it's more just like his commitment to his own power and ego. Another example is in 1920, when Woodrow Wilson was incapacitated by a stroke, he wanted to run for a third term, and he was trying to get his name out of the Democratic Convention. And Wilson didn't have the type of charisma that FDR did, or the firm control of the Democratic Party that FDR did in 44. And there was also not the questions of war and other things in 1920. And people ask around, it's like, and Wilson is like, Wilson capable of running? And a few people are like, no, he's like, he's had a stroke. He can barely operate. His like wife and his assistant were running the country for almost a year. So they did not, he did not get the nomination, but he still wanted to run for president when he had a stroke. So Biden will probably not be convinced, no matter how much his health and physical well-being or mental well-being deteriorate. He is still going to want to run. So how to make him not run? Democrats clearly don't want him to run. And I think when the midterms turn out to be a disaster for Democrats, they are going to privately blame Biden. And you're going to see news reports of saying Democrat strategists and insiders blame Biden for the terrible result. And they're going to want to, he's going to have nothing to run on either, because he's not going to accomplish anything if Republicans take Congress. All he's going to be able to do is just blame Republicans for everything bad, but he's not going to do anything on his own. There's still going to be a massive border crisis for as long as there is, unless he decides to start enforcing the law when Republicans win. So it's like how they're going to force him out. And really the only way I could see this is with the Hunter Biden stuff. And it really has to take the federal government being like, we will pardon Hunter and we will not investigate you if you don't run for president. Now, whether this will actually work on Joe Biden is a question. And it also doesn't appear, he had a weird interview last week where he's like saying, I'm committed to running. And then they're like, well, what about your wife? And he's like, Dr. Biden. He got like, it was total blubber. And his wife may be like, you're not running. And it's like, wife is clearly his caretaker at this moment. So, which is very different from Woodrow Wilson's wife, who wanted him to run again in 1920, even though he clearly was not in physical health to do that. And so there's been examples of it, of like presidents or people who should not run at all, who just run, and those results happen. So with Wilson, or not with Wilson, but with Biden, I don't know. Democrats definitely don't want him to run again, but I think even if he tries to run again, they may quietly back primary challengers to him. And that's going to be tough for people within the administration to run against him. Like, you're not going to see Kamala run against him. First off, nobody likes Kamala. Kamala, the only thing that can help her is being coronated as the next person to run. Buttigieg, who's another potential, it would be hard for him to run because he's a member of the Biden administration. He can't campaign about how the Biden administration sucks. So it'd be very awkward for those people within the administration to run who are wanting to run. It would have to be someone as an outsider, and the only person I can really think of is Newsom and Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders is going to be old as shit. Like, Bernie is going to be, he's going to be in his 80s. I think he's older than Biden. I think he's a year older than Biden, or maybe he was just born earlier in 42. I think he's going to be at least 82 in 2024. And those are probably the only two people, or maybe I don't know who else. There's not really that many people with star power. Maybe Liz Warren could run, but Liz Warren is like falling off the face of the earth. Like, no one really cares about Liz Warren that much anymore. So they don't have that much deep talent pool to challenge Biden if he does want to run. But they may just say, like, Biden, you can run, Democrats, but we're going to have someone run against you, or we'll be fine, or there's going to be a serious challenger to him, and that person may run. And Newsom may just challenge Biden. And it's very hard for an incumbent president to lose a primary directly. I'd have to think of a time where the incumbent, I'm sure there may be a few examples of an incumbent president losing the nomination. I mean, LBJ resigned in 1968, or said he wouldn't run again because he was worried that he would lose a primary battle. But then he regretted that decision. I'm trying to think of another case. I mean, there's been some serious. Gerald Ford almost lost his nomination battle in the 1976 Republican primary against Ronald Reagan. Carter had a very tough competitive primary in 1980 against Ted Kennedy. There are examples of this. I'd have to think of a time where a president ran directly it may have been happened when it was more dictated by the conventions than and then I mean there were challenges to FDR. In 40 there was the most serious challenge, but it wasn't that serious. I mean it was serious in that there was people behind it, but he easily won. So I'd have to think of the time when it was like an incumbent president ran for the nomination and then they picked someone else at the convention. There are times of the convention. There are times of the convention did that, or they said like you're not running again. But I'd have to think through it. But in the modern time of the modern primary system that is usually determines these party candidates from the 70s, there was two times where there's like the incumbent with Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter, where they had tough primary battles of the barely that they overcame. I think it is very possible for a president, especially if Democrats are not wanting this. And Newsom would probably only run if donors and other like the party operatives are just saying like Biden can't do this another time, and he may just jump in. So the only two things is I think that they put so much pressure on him and his wife or others who just say like, look, there's a lot of bad things happening. You're just not gonna you don't have the health to do this. You have to run. Maybe his wife convinces him not to run. If he does run, I think that Newsom will probably run against him. So that's my predictions on that. Yes, he could still be a paper tiger in the general election, but we'll go from there. I think he would be a very competitive candidate. I don't know who else would try to primary Biden, and I don't think there really is another person who can besides Newsom, who has that star power, who has the ability to work within the establishment party and is able to take that message home. It has to be someone outside the administration, and it has to be somebody with some national standing. And outside of Bernie Sanders, who may run again at 82, it's just Newsom. And the final thought on that, I know we keep talking about this, I don't see it would be very weird if Biden has an uncontested primary. I don't think Democrats want that. And if we do have an uncontested primary, that probably is bad for Democrats if they think that Biden is their best choice for going into the 2024 election. Biden's going to be in such terrible shape. Biden was saved by COVID and that he did not have to do a really intensive campaigning schedule where he's open up to gaffes and he's really putting a strain on his health, that he was able to campaign in a way that was suitable for him as he's a 77-year-old man going on 78 who is not in the best health or best physical health, mental health. I keep wanting to say physical. I keep saying physical and mental health, and he was able to overcome that, and also media, covered him for him. It's going to be very tough for 2024 to do an intensive presidential campaign style for him, and so there's ways that I don't know. I don't think they're going to allow him to have an uncontested primary. There's going to be someone to challenge him, and Bernie, if it's just Bernie challenging him, that's going to be a very weird race. But if I do think that Newsom will challenge him, there may be somebody else I'm not thinking of. There could be a surprise. I mean, maybe Liz Warren decides to jump in. I don't think she would do that, but I mean, there's somebody else who has a reasonable level of star power to do that. Maybe Jared Polis from Colorado. I don't think Jared Polis would do that, but it has to be somebody who's like relatively popular, some national standing, and is able to win over a lot of these big time donors and big time operators to back his candidacy, because you're going against an incumbent president. That's a dangerous proposition in politics, and you have to be really confident you can win. So now for our final questions. They both come from Cargo Shorts Respected. They're both pretty easy questions to ask. One, what do you think about Steve Bannon's jail sentence? Was it worth it? I don't know. I'm not quite sure what he means by worth it, or if it's going on. Yeah, I mean, he's found in contempt. He's going to jail. Was it worth it to send a message? Yeah, I mean, January 6th committee is like it. He's putting it, he's putting his values on the line. You got to give him credit for that. I mean, most people would just like gone along and submitted themselves to the January 6th committee. It's hard to say that it was illegal what he did. I mean, they are enforcing it on the law, but he's willing to go to jail for it. So hats off to him, and props to him for doing that. Not many people are willing to do that. We'll see they're trying to set an example that this is what will happen to Trump if Trump doesn't submit to the will of these investigators. So we'll see. But Bannon's got other legal troubles outside of January 6th and stuff, especially with that Build the Wall Foundation that the state of New York, even though he got a pardon for that, the state of New York is still trying to go after him for. So we may see him on another perf walk. The second question, I don't want to give too much interest in it because I always try to avoid these Twitter feuds that I'm in. But he asked, could you talk about the book cat cringe that's been going on? There's this account, Book Cat. He's been around for a while. He has an axe to grind to me. It's like their axes is their new symbol. He's been getting mad at me for being like sympathetic to Confederacy. Like I have tons of ancestors who fought for the Confederacy. I don't like view them as this evil regime that we have to attack with the same ferocity as Antifa. And so I don't get it. It's like people like, if you could be like relitigating the Civil War, like you could be fine that you think that the Union was the best side or the Confederacy, depending on your ancestors or whatever. But people on the right are going to have some degree of sympathy for the Confederacy. It's always been the case. It's always been that way. You're not going to convince them by posting walls of text trying to prove that they're controlled by international bankers or whatever have you. There's other important parts going on in here. And just like demanding that people just like hate their ancestors and spit on them and then support and then have this weird idea that Abraham Lincoln was like some base like fascist or something. I don't know what they have some weird theory about Lincoln. I don't try to spin. I feel like I'll lose. It's like the opposite of IQ supplements taking this stuff seriously. But I think it's like that's a very left-wing idea to demand people hate their ancestors and view them as evil. And you're basically viewing them as evil and like worthy of contempt as like absolute tools of international bankers, even though, Britain was not that fond of them. And also these international bankers were also financing the Union as well. But by any of this standard, it's like, that's exactly what American public education teaches. Children is to hate your ancestors, to spit on them, and see them as evil slavers and colonialists and genociders of the Indians and just doing all these bad things. And instead it's like right-wing accounts doing this just so you can please their niche theory that they have. So that's all it is. I mean, I don't try to dwell that too much. Yeah, as I point out, the guy, he used to be a much bigger right-wing Twitter account, but people got tired of his shtick, so now he only gets like 10 likes. But he's still around. It's whatever. He can, I'm a believer in free speech. People can say whatever they want, but I think it's a little ridiculous to demand people to disavow their ancestors just because of just some theory you have and your demand that everyone support it. And then your power and influence amounts to you just getting 10 likes on Twitter. And then some extremely low level people may like occasionally like your stuff, but that's it. And so I didn't want to address it too much because there's not much to address. I think most people are going to agree to what I'm saying. You can have a theoretical debate about Union versus Confederacy, but the more important point is people want to be proud of their ancestors. The Confederate flag is a representation of Southern heritage. It's also now can be seen as a symbol of Middle America resisting the oversight and tyrannical rule of the globalist American empire. And it means a lot more than, what exactly the Confederate government was doing or whoever it was behind it. And people just want to imagine they're so fixated on like this Confederacy is evil, but then they'll ignore all the things associated with the Union, people like Thaddeus Stevens and all these like radical left-wing types who are involved in the Union, but you have to involved about like some minor figure of the Confederacy. So that's all the thoughts on that. People always have feuds all the time. People always get worked up about my opinions. It's the weirdest thing of like how much people are like demanding like me getting purged and executed for stuff. It's like first like telling people not to watch the NFL. Then it's like telling people that there's problems in rural America. Then it's like telling people we're not going to have a civil war and you shouldn't be LARPing a civil war person. Now it's like telling people that like are being pro-Greek life, pro-fraternities and sororities, defending that caused a lot of controversy. And then like now like the Confederacy thing, it's like it's not most of right-wing Twitter. It's just this narrow faction of it. and they all like and retweet each other, and that's the only people who like and retweet their stuff. So it's what it is. I'm not going to dwell on it. I think what's most important is like this stuff is like, because there's much bigger accounts and others who will get in really mad about saying you don't watch the NFL. And as indicative of larger thoughts dealing with the mainstream right and conservatism and the Civil War and rural LARPing stuff. I think that's like stuff that's really seeping into the mainstream right. The bizarre Confederate theory where the Union is like this fascist state or whatever, but like a positive sense, I don't see that like really seeping into the mainstream. It's just really associated with this narrow faction of right-wing Twitter. So it's really not that much of a concern. So with that in mind, that's it for today on Highly Respected. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the episode, and we're going to have another incredible IQ supplement later this week. Actually, it may deal with something with the Civil War, believe it or not. So be ready for that topic. Well, it's actually going to be talking about Abraham Lincoln. We're going to be answering the question about Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln, based or cringe? So be on the lookout for that. And we're going to have another incredible, highly respected episode at its normal time on Monday next week. So tune in for that. So until next time, stay respected.